Hello and welcome everyone to Iris Biotech's 7th online workshop. True to our slogan, empowering peptide innovation, we are keen on knowledge exchange and getting in contact with scientists all over the world. Therefore, we started this online workshop series in summer 2021. Today, our focus is on efficient and highly specific protein modification. Our guest speaker, Professor Knud Jensen, will explain to you how a sophisticated construction of his tags can enable either alpha-amine or epsilon-amine specific acylation of proteins and peptides. My name is Raimund Meyer. I'm working as a project manager at Iris Biotech, and today I will guide you through this workshop. If you wish to announce your participation on social media, please feel free to use the hashtag Iris Workshop Series, which is also displayed right now in the Microsoft Teams chat. To have a pleasant experience for all participants, I would like to begin with some technical guidelines. To ensure the best possible audio and video quality, all participants are automatically muted and your video camera is switched off. This live event is recorded, thus if you enter late or miss anything, please check on the bottom left side of your Teams screen if you are watching the recording or if you are live, which is shown by the red broadcasting symbol. You have the possibility to pause the video, rewind or jump back to the live session. In addition, the recording of the workshop will be uploaded on our homepage afterwards. Questions can be submitted by using the Q&A chat of Microsoft Teams. You can enter your name or submit the questions anonymously. We will frequently check the questions, publish them, and submit them to the respective speaker. If you have any technical queries, you can also submit them in this Q&A chat. Our technical assistant will then connect with you and try to solve the problem. Initially, the questions are just visible for the organizers and will then be published to the audience, so don't worry if your submitted question does not appear on the chat screen immediately. To try out the Q&A chat, we will now post a question which you can answer. Now you should see the question, which well-known purification tag can be used for specific protein modification within this chat. Please feel free to answer it to try out this Q&A chat tool. Yeah, we already see the answers coming in, and of course the correct answer is the his tag. So as this seems to work, I would like to quickly give you an overview on today's agenda. We will start with a short company and topic introduction by our project manager, Karin Rustler. Afterwards, our external speaker, Professor Knud Jensen, will present to you his research on highly specific protein acylation by the help of his tags. As mentioned, questions will be collected throughout all talks in the Q&A chat and are forwarded to the speaker. Of course, you can also get in contact via email or phone call after the workshop. One last note from my side, if you accidentally close your Microsoft Teams window, don't panic. The workshop is available as recording and you won't miss anything. Just relog in and view the recording. You can also play this recording at increased speed until you catch up with the live event again. After this technical intro, let's continue with the first agenda point, a short introduction to our company by our project manager, Karin Rustler. Karin studied biochemistry at the University of Regensburg and obtained her doctoral degree in organic chemistry for the synthesis and characterization of photoswitchable compounds for biological applications. During her PhD, she stayed abroad at Kyoto University, Japan for several months, and beginning of 2020, she joined Iris Biotech as a project manager, and in the meantime, she's now our head of marketing and sales. Karin, thank you for your precious time. Please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, Raimund, for the kind introduction, and also welcome from my side to today's online workshop. Within the next slides, I want to give you a brief introduction to the company Iris Biotech, as well as very short info on protein tags besides the his tag. Iris Biotech has been founded in 2001. In 2013, due to the growing demand for customized products, we started the Iris Biotech laboratories, which are located in Willstedt, close to the French border, whereas Iris Biotech itself is located in Magdriedwitz, so close to the Czech border. Our portfolio comprises more than 6,000 products. To realize this, we are working together with 15 manufacturing partners around the globe, which we select very carefully. Having only qualified partners on board allows us to realize a complaint rate consistently below 0.5%. In 2021, we refreshed our company logo and switched to a more modern design. So on the bottom right side, in the middle of the circle, you see the new logo, and on the top left side within the circle, you still see the old one. To give you not only facts and figures, I also want to show you the beautiful landscape we are surrounded by in the Fichtel Mountains, as well as a picture of our company building in Magdriedwitz. We see ourselves as qualified supplier and competent consultant and want to support our customers in the design and execution of their projects, no matter if they are in small research scale or commercial bulk production. Our portfolio provides building blocks and reagents for peptide synthesis, but also advanced linkers as well as drug delivery technologies, all rounded up by our custom synthesis service. Besides, we are providing our self-written brochures and flyers free for download on our website to promote knowledge exchange. Simply true to our slogan, empowering peptide innovation. Another important feature for knowledge exchange are our online workshops. Today, we are pleased to have Professor Jensen with us, who will give a talk about autocatalytic histags for the chemical modification of proteins. But before we directly jump into this topic, I would like to mention other protein tags which can be used for introducing functional moieties, namely the halo tag, snap tag, and clip tag. The halo tag is a 33 kilodalton protein which is linked to the protein of interest. The halo tag can then react with chloroalkanes from ligands to form a covalent bond. Using this, labels or specific functional groups can be introduced on a protein. So on this slide below, you see the reaction scheme of the halo tag reacting with a chloroalkane. Similar is the snap tag. So in this case, a cysteine residue of the snap tag reacts with O6-benzylguanine derivatives. Also in this case, a covalent bond is formed and functional moieties or labels can be introduced via the ligand. Last but not least, there is also the clip tag, which is a modified version of the snap tag, which reacts with benzylcytosine ligands. So also here you see the reaction scheme. All those three tags can be used to introduce labels or functional groups on a protein upon reaction with a specific ligand. If you are interested to get more information, get in contact or download our brochure about linkerology and discover our portfolio of available ligands for those protein tags. With this, I would like to kindly thank you for your attention and pass on to Professor Jensen today's main act. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Karin, for giving this introduction. So as no one in the audience had questions to your short intro, let's now really go on with our highlight and switch to the external guest, Professor Knud Jensen. To introduce him to you, Knud Johan Jensen studied organic chemistry at the University of Copenhagen and obtained his PhD in bioorganic chemistry, working with this year's Nobel laureate Morten Meldal at the Carlsberg Laboratory. He then went to America as a postdoctoral fellow with Professor George Barony at the University of Minnesota. Returning to Europe, he started as an assistant professor at the Danish Technical University in Lyngby, followed by a position as associate professor at the University of Copenhagen. In 2007, he was promoted professor at the Faculty of Science there. His research is at the interface between synthetic chemistry, biology, and biophysics. It includes peptide and carbohydrate chemical biology and nanobioscience. Having published around 200 publications, proceedings, or patents, he has, among others, recently been awarded the Max Bergmann Medal, so this is Germany's highest award in peptide science, and in his home country Denmark, he was appointed as a Knight of the Order of the Dannebrog. Knut, it is a great pleasure to host you as our guest speaker. The stage is yours. We're looking forward to hearing about your research. And for the audience, please post your questions by using the Q&A chat.
Thank you very much for the invitation to speak to you, and thank you very much for the very kind introduction. I hope you can see my slides. There's no objection.
Yes, works.
Good. Good. So site-selective modification of proteins is really important because it can give conjugates with new properties. And I thank Dr. Rustler for the introduction to other methods for doing this. And I would show how you can use really small peptide segments as tool to achieve these conjugations. So the conjugates that can be obtained would be peptide and protein, proteins conjugated with lipids, polyethylene glycol, glycans. It could be antibody-drug conjugates, peptide and protein oligonucleotide conjugates, which my group is also working with. And these could be tools for chemical biology. It could be potential new therapeutics. But really, it would open the introduction of a lot of new functionalities that can be used for biophysics or even for immobilization on surfaces. But of course, this is a real challenge to organic chemistry because proteins are complex molecules. There are many functional groups. There are many copies of the same side chain functional groups. And proteins have chemical abilities and physical abilities. So I see this here as a real frontier for organic chemistry to develop methods for chemical modification of proteins. A number of methods, many methods have of course been reported, but few of them are widely used. You're all familiar with, of course, sorry for this change here, for the maleimide couplings to cysteines. There are also other ways to alkylate cysteines. It's nice when it works. It has a number of limitations. In addition, one can perform pH-controlled isolation of lysines, but it requires a high pH and is not really selective between different lysines. Then there are methods for N-terminal isolation, then that would be at lower pH, but that's not truly selective. One can perform reductive alkylations or diazo transfer. Then there's of course the amazing native chemical ligation. It's fantastic when it works. And then there's the N-terminal oxidation that to generate a glyoxyl moiety. Very nice method, but often results in oxidations of, for example, methionine residues. So I think it's clear that there's a need for new chemical methods to modify proteins. One approach that has been taken was the use of peptide segments. So this could, for example, be the tetrasus tag with arsenic compounds, or the tetracer that would react with bisboronic compounds, or this tetrapeptide here that has been designed to have increased reactivity with this thiol out here with perfluoroaryl compounds. Now, what we've been focusing on is what we call autocatalytic peptide segments. So these are peptide segments that catalyze their own covalent chemical modification. Now, the term autocatalytic can be defined in different ways, and the way I define it here is analogous to the use for glycogenin. Glycogenin is the protein found at the core of glycogen, and glycogenin is a glycosyl transferase that catalyzes its own glycosylation. So I use the word autocatalytic in that sense, and would allow site-selective introduction of new moieties and hopefully introduce new functionalities. So you need functionalities that otherwise would not be present in the protein. The inspiration for the start of our project here was taken by a well-known side reaction. So it had been reported by Geoghegan and others that proteins with an N-terminal his tag could undergo a really annoying side reaction where it reacted with gluconolactone. So this was well established in literature, and it was clear that it only happened at the N-terminal close to the his tag. And when I realized that this was a very selective side reaction, I immediately thought, can we optimize this into or develop it into a useful reaction? And we, of course, have focused on acylations. Acylations are fantastic reactions. They give very stable linkages, can be performed in aqueous media. So when we started out, we were up against acylation. So that would be a not very specific acylation with rather reactive esters, such as the NHS ester. And that would give typically a variety of product, could be N-terminal, could be at the license. And we endeavored to develop a more selective method for acylation, and this became the gly-his tag and eventually the lys-his tag. So our approach was as described here. First, we worked with gluconolactone. Now, gluconolactone is really, really inexpensive. You can use it in as large excess as you want. It doesn't introduce anything useful, and one can envision having modified gluconolactone as has been reported in the literature. However, this is a lengthy synthesis. But here we used it as a tool to see what N-terminal sequence would be suitable for acylation, in this case with gluconolactone. Next, we then thought, okay, we need to get rid of gluconolactone and develop compounds that introduce useful functionalities, and this should be compounds that are easily available. It shouldn't be a lengthy synthesis, and then in the end, of course, it only matters if this can be done on proteins. It took us about 8 years from initially thinking about this to publication of our paper in 2018 in Nature Communications. Good. So this was made possible by peptide synthesis. So I'm not going to show our approach to peptide synthesis, just mention that it's standard in the sense that it's FMOG SPPS. We use Tentagel as always. We tend to like DSC and Oxima. We use Cyro2 robots, Cyro1 robots, or the Olstra. And then we sometimes use Biotage, Isolera, or Select instruments for purification. And here's our book on peptide synthesis. And of course, we buy our reagents from Iris Biotech. Good. So the first part was to see which peptide segment would promote N-terminal acylation. And we chose this here because of its chromatographic properties and for it being a UV active. And it doesn't really react very well with gluconolactone. If you put in a glycine, you start seeing reactivity. If you put in a histidine, reactivity goes up. If you put in multiple histidines, reactivity goes further up. And then if you have a glycine followed by histidines, you actually have a very nice, very selective acylation of the N-terminal. So this clearly demonstrated to us that we could optimize the sequence and that the requirement would be for either an N-terminal lysine or an N-terminal glycine linked to histidine. I should here emphasize that you cannot have additional amino acids out here, because for this approach here, you need a free N-alpha amino group to be acylated. I also should say that in my understanding, it's attractive to express a protein not with an N-terminal histidine, but with an N-terminal glycine and then histidine. So there is a chemical reason as well as a protein expression reason for doing this. But if you had a protein with an N-terminal histidine, that can also be acylated with this if you have sufficient number of histidines here. Okay, we then went on to work with longer sequences, and there we decided to work with this peptide here, which we have renamed beltide because it's a belt-forming peptide. And if you look here, glycine, 6 histidines, very nice, very selective acylation of the N-terminal. This here has 3 lysines, and you see a little bit of over-acylation. From my point of view, this is a very nice, very selective acylation. If you separate this a little bit further from the main peptide segment, you can actually decrease the formation of the diacylation. If you block the N-terminal, you don't see a lot of acylation. If you place a lysine close to it, you get some increased diacylation. I will return to that in the second part of my talk. Okay, and oh yeah, I should have shown the reagent here. So we started out thinking from naively starting with physical organic chemistry, and we thought, okay, we want to have an aceto group. This year's Nobel laureate have developed methods for functionalization of aceto groups, so that's the way we wanted to go. And we thought, okay, we just screen esters in a very simple-minded manner. We have a phenol ester, we have an activated nitrophenol ester, and then we have what we thought would be a deactivated phenol ester, which has an electron donating paramethoxy group out here. And as it turned out, this reagent here gave us this selectivity. These 2 reagents were not selective at all. And that became then really interesting, because then it's the least reactive of these 3 reagents that gave the selectivity. Good. So does this work on proteins? And here we collaborated with Sanish Roffelin, who is now at DTU and who we continue to collaborate with. And she expressed a GFP variant with this N-terminal histag, so glycine and 6 histidines. We treated it with this reagent here, and then with this strained cyclooctane. This actually in 2 steps gave a very nice formation of the desired product, which has a biotin group introduced here. And here you see the deconvoluted MS spectra for this. This is the starting material. This is the over-acylated, and then the main product that we desired. Probably the deconvolution of the MS data over-represents the formation of the diacylated product here. But considering the complexity of GFP, we were very pleased with this. And here you can also see it by gel, starting material here, reaction of GFP with the aceto compound, and then strain promoter clicking in here. That moves it from here up to here. This now introduces a PEG chain, and you see a clear shift here in the band. Although strain promoter alkane-azide coupling is fantastic, it's not quantitative, and believe that the residual band here is just unreacted aceto functionalized GFP, so it's not lack of acylation with our aceto compound here. It's a non-quantitative reaction with the strain promoter with the strained cyclooctane. Okay, so just to show you how we then typically optimize. So we start with 2.5 or plus 2.5 equivalents, maybe 16 hours reaction time, and so this is for the protein sumo, which I'm going to show a little bit more of later. And that's a non-optimized approach. There we straight away get 60% incorporation. Then we get some unreacted. We prioritize to have unreacted rather than diisolated here. But if we then really want, this can be further optimized, and we can move from 60% monoisolation to 80%. And then we have a little bit more of the diisolated, but actually it's not very dramatic. So if you want to do this for your favorite protein, this reaction can be optimized, and can be optimized for the number of reagents used, or the number of the time used for this, or for the sequence that is required. At this stage, we focused on having 6 histidines because we also wanted to use it for metal ion mediated pull down. But if that's not on priority for you, you can use a shorter his segment. So here you see the reaction with the protein BR2. At that time, Sanne Schroffelen was working with Morten Meldal actually, and Morten was interested in this protein, and we were allowed to have access to this here. And again, we have our first isolation with this, our favorite reagent. And then in the second step, now it's a QAC, so it's a cover-promoted click reaction to get this fluorophore here. And it gives a very nice incorporation, because we have now this cyanine 718 on it. Here, this is a biotin reagent. It's available from Iris. You see we can visualize the incorporation on this cutout from a gel. It's biotin, and then we can visualize it by horseradish peroxidase with streptavidin attached to it, and then we can see the activity of the horseradish peroxidase to visualize this. And again, this gives a very nice and selective incorporation. Now I'm going to show you a really, really boring slide, and I'm very pleased that it's very boring because this addresses the questions: are these compounds stable? Because I mentioned we're looking for an autocatalytic process. So could it also catalyze the reverse reaction? And we do not see that within meaningful time frame. So here, this is the peptide 15, which I showed previously. It has an acetoacetyl attached. This is the starting peptide here, phosphate buffer. Here it's an acetate buffer. This is 7 days, 25 degrees, 7 days, 37 degrees, and you do not see degradation. So under these conditions, there is no clear indication of reversibility. So we conclude that they are stable. Of course, one could also try to study this in blood serum and so on. But from a chemical perspective, there's no reversibility to be worried about here. Good. As I mentioned initially, we did see some isolation of a lysine if it was placed smack next to the histidine. And we then thought, okay, can we develop this? Could we develop a sequence with a lysine next to the histidine so that we would isolate this lysine side chain, the N-epsilon, selectively over other lysine side chains? And we published this earlier this year, and I should also here for disclosure mention that there is a patent application. So can we develop a segment that gives this, and can we develop it so that it does it C-terminal and in a loop? This would be a more general approach to his tag isolation. And again, we collaborated with Sanne Schroffelen on this. Now, we started out screening peptides. My background is in peptide science, so I always like to see things at the peptide level first. And we toyed around. So this is the work of Kasper Sørensen in my group. We toyed around with the Beltide sequence, and then different tags where with lysine close to histidine. We had different length. We had it left and right and inserted. And as you can see down here, a segment with histidines on both sides gave a very good and very selective acylation. Here I would like to remind you that the belt-tied sequence has 3 lysines. And this works for N-terminal. So here we had blocked the N-terminal by acetylation. So this is on this particular lysine. It also works C-terminally, and again on this lysine here. So we were quite encouraged by this, and then directly moved on to screening proteins. So in parallel with Kasper's work on peptides, Sanne and Christian Kofod had worked on proteins, where they also screened different tags. Here you show data for our reagent 1 here, as well as an analog, or a couple of analogs here, where we have introduced other functionalities here. And then we have this clickable fluorophore down here. If we do not have a tag, so just have the superfolder GFP, we do not really see any incorporation, whereas if we have a his tag, this simple one or this more elaborate one, we do see incorporation of our fluorophore in a 2-step protocol. We can see this on gel, we can see this on mass spec. Okay, so we tested this for GFP, we tested this for another protein, SUMO, as well as for MBP and a couple of other proteins. P1 here means one acylation, P2 means the undesired double acylation. And so you can see if you don't have your tag on it, you don't really see acylation to a significant level. If you have the refined tag here, you see a very good incorporation and little of the double. So again, this is GFP, it has 20 other lysines. So if you think about this in selectivity over other lysines, it's a very high selectivity. It works well on SUMO, which is small, as well as on MBP, and that works even better actually. So this, from our point of view, shows the generality of this approach. Here we've shown 3 different proteins that are very, very different, and they've, in particular in the case of MBP, really has a large number of lysines that we compete against. So this was C-terminal. Is this also feasible in a loop? And here Sanne re-engineered a GFP so that in the loop that connects the beta 10 to beta 11 strand, she inserted a loop out here, and this was then expressed and purified by Christian Kofod down here. So if you just so without the loop, not much happened. If you have the loop, get selective acylation there. If you have the improved loop here, you get a good selectivity. And with this one down here, you are at almost 60% with some over acylation. But mind you, this is for considering that there are 20 other licenses here. And this is based on gel and also quantification by mass spectrometry. And we always like to also analyze by mass spectrometry and try to quantify from mass spectrometry. And in our experience, we believe that the degree of over-isolation, if anything, it's overestimated, and it's the nature of how you do the deconvolution. And then we toyed around with having other amino acids present to see whether it's compatible with it, but also to see whether it potentially could enhance. And they do not enhance, but it is, I would say, compatible. So this showed that you can insert this loop in a rather complex protein and get very selective acylation. Then Christian Kofod here, he wanted to also show this with beads. So he worked with streptavidin coated beads, so that if you introduce a biotin onto your GFP, then it would be pulled down by strep-avidin and would be visualized. Now, if you use this reagent, this is just the NHS ester. That will, of course, react with your unmodified GFP, so that's a negative result. Our reagent here does not react with unmodified GFP, whereas if you have your GFP with this his tag or this his tag, it reacts and it's being pulled down by the strep-avidin coated beads, and then it lines up because it is GFP that you're looking at. And then you can look at it at the kinetics from this point. So as I mentioned, I like to show mass spectrometry. If you were to look at just these images here, then you would say here we do not have binding at all, whereas here we have very clear binding here. So this really shows a dramatic effect in the ability to be acylated with our tuned reagents down here. Good. Now, as you will recall, his tags bind to metal ions, and that's what's used in metal ion affinity pull down. So could we use metal ions in this process? First of all, would it be compatible with metal ions? Secondly, could we maybe turn off and on the effect so that under some conditions we isolate and we don't isolate? And so here you can see that it is compatible with magnesium ions, which is good. If you add zinc, you really decrease the degree of isolation. If you then add EDTA, it's back full on here. Nickel does interact also, cobalt, sorry, to a lesser degree. So there is an effect on the isolation capabilities from metal ions that potentially can be explored. We have not fully explored this, but there are some interesting opportunities here. Now, I started out mentioning antibody-drug conjugates as potential applications of this. And antibody-drug conjugates are a really very promising area for development of new therapies, in particular oncotherapies. And there are 11, as I recall, approved, FDA-approved ADC oncotherapies. And antibodies are complex molecules. Typically, as I understand it, antibodies are modified chemically by preparing an antibody with a free thiol and then do chemical modifications of this. There are, of course, other methods of doing this, and there are companies formed around other methods of doing this, like Synaffix, Araris, Tubulis, and so on. But we thought, can our method be used for antibodies? And express this antibody with this his tag on here, reacted it with the phenyl ester 1 here, and this is the monofunctionalized product here. This is the functionalized product, so we have a little bit of over-isolation, but it's limited from my point of view. Incorporation of this did not decrease the functionality. We did not expect that, but just to make sure we proved that. Then secondly, down here, maybe it's not so clear, but here we showed that this isolation of this antibody can be performed in the presence of a number of other proteins here. So the other proteins you see here, we had cleaved the heavy chain and the light chain, so you see them coming up, and you see the modification here on the heavy chain, and then a little bit on another protein that was present here. But otherwise, this shows, and this has actually a polyhis sequence that promotes this reaction. Otherwise, you see a very nice selectivity over other proteins that we added to this mixture to see whether this isolation was selective for this antibody in the presence of other proteins. So this points also towards the use of our methods for the isolation of proteins that have not been purified yet. So for the isolation of crude mixtures of expressed proteins. So what is the mechanism? We've been working on that for a number of years now, and will hopefully very soon finalize our study here. So you could envision a nucleophilic mechanism. So that is the intermediate formation of N-acyl imidazoles, or a specific base catalysis. And here actually we built on classical physical organic chemistry, going back to Jenks in the late 50s and in the 60s. We believe it is a nucleophilic mechanism, and we hope to submit the publication soon, and then you will see our that we've done a rather extensive study to understand the role of pH and the role of particular histidine moieties. So here's the potential mechanism. It could be a covalent intermediate, something like this, or an intermolecular acyl transfer complex here. But you will have to wait until hopefully not too late next year when we will publish this. Good. So in conclusion, isolation of peptides and proteins is a really good way of modifying them if it's performed selectively. NHS esters give typically a very unselective modification. We've developed the gly-his and the lys-his tags that direct their own chemical modification by amide bond formation, and for this we've developed tuned reagents to carry this out, and some of them are already commercially available. And I'm very pleased that Iris Biotech has made these commercially available. We've already summarized our work and put it into perspective. This came out just a few months ago. So it requires an N-terminal gly-his segment here. It requires these tuned reagents. Conditions can be 4 degrees. 4 degrees is attractive from a protein handling point of view because proteins may prefer to be stored at this temperature. But if you need to do the reaction at room temperature, that is certainly also possible, and we've also done this also to some more stable proteins. And his tag can still be used for purification. And then we've recently developed these new lys-his tags for isolations in loops and C-terminal. And with this, I would like to thank all my co-workers who worked on this. They are highlighted over here. And you've also seen some of the names along the way here. Funding came from a private Danish foundation, the Willem Foundation. And with this, I would like to thank you for your kind attention.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Knut, for sharing these interesting results with us. And we have collected quite some questions to your talk. Many, as much as I can see, are about the specificity and the nature of the tag. So I want to start with the first one. Can you explain why this his 6 gly had less over acylation than a his 6 and then immediately the rest of the peptide? I think that was quite at the beginning of your presentation.
Yeah, let me try to find this here. Is this the one? Is this?
Yeah, here you had diacylation in 8% without the glycine and only 3% when adding a further glycine.
Yes.
So is there an explanation, or is it just statistics?
Well, if you look at up here at the Bell-type sequence here, it has in the position 4 a lysine. So we've moved that lysine a little bit further away. That could be one explanation. The other explanation is, of course, that the glycine is the most dynamic amino acid. Mm-hmm. And so I believe that we need to have an unstructured segment here. If you force histidines to be close to a lysine, such in an alpha helix, and you place them correctly, then these histidines within the alpha helix can catalyze the acylation of that lysine. This has been shown by a Swedish group. Our approach is, and if you get into that scenario, then you have a problem. What we have here is what we believe are rather unstructured peptide segments, and that is part of the reason why it works.
Okay, yeah. So another question is probably about recombinant applications. So after the his tag acylations, the his tag sequence will remain within the protein chain, and is this a concern from your side?
This is a very good question, and so the his maybe I should show you this one. So the his tag will remain in the sequence. However, I should say that what we normally choose to have a gly his 6 or a loose his 6 to also have the ability to do metal ion directed affinity pull down. If that is not something you need to have, then you can in most cases have a shorter histidine sequence. So you can optimize the exact sequence for your particular purpose if you are developing a therapeutic. As far as I know, there is not a consensus saying that if you have a histidine of such and such a length, you will get a particular immune response also. But of course, one needs to think about this when developing a therapeutic. Now, in my normal medicinal chemistry, I'm interested in therapies for the treatment of obesity and diabetes. And there the treatment is chronic. And that means the bar for what you can have in your peptide protein is really, really high. In oncotherapies, where the treatment probably would be shorter term, I think there would be somewhat less concern about having additional histidines in there. In the end, of course, you need to test this. So the answer to the question would be yes and maybe no.
Okay, thank you. So again, something to the sequence itself. You were using acetyl capping when you wanted to do lysine side chain acylation, when you had that his tag at the N terminus. Without the acetyl capping, would you expect a double acylation in a, say, his K, his 3, K, his 6? Or do you think the one is preferred over the other?
It's clearly preferred. We don't cap our proteins. Right?
Okay, I see. Yeah.
Yeah. So we don't cap the proteins. Of course, proteins can be capped by themselves, right? Depending on how it's expressed. But we don't cap our proteins. So as long as you have your tag is away from your N terminus, it does not catalyze the acylation of the N terminus.
Okay, yeah. So something also about recombinant proteins, obviously. Do you expect undesired acylation near histidine-rich patches in some proteins? So I know there are, for example, some proteins that are co-purified on nickel columns because they're histidine-rich. And if you have some histidine-rich protein itself, do you think you have some, say, rather unspecific acylations in them then?
So this is what we think we have up here.
Okay.
You're right that polyhis sequences can occur in nature. They are relatively rare, but they can occur in nature. So there is a scenario where you would inadvertently acylate a naturally occurring near a naturally occurring polyhis segment, but that they tend to be rare. If you look at the work by the Japanese Professor Hamachi and as my colleague Kurt Gotthöf, they've been trying to use naturally occurring polyhis sequences, but they are, to my knowledge, relatively rare. But of course, you need to look into that. I should say here that for our approach, the LUS has to be rather close to this poly-his sequence, and that is even more rare.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Another question, how do his tag acylations compare to genetically encoded methods? So I guess the person who asked this was thinking of
sure.
amber suppression
Yeah.
or whatever.
Good, and this is a valid question. So so this now comes from somebody who's not a specialist in incorporation of modified amino acids. It's my understanding. I mean, obviously, it's a fantastic technique that you can express unnatural amino acids in proteins, and it's important. It's my understanding that at the end of the day, it is a little bit limited which amino acids you can incorporate. And it's my understanding that there might be a problem with scale-up. Again, comes from somebody who is not an expert in the field, but these are the two limitations that I hear my colleagues mention. In contrast to that, our method here is, in a way, a straightforward isolation method that is just catalyzed. So I think our method has the advantage of relying on standard protein expression approaches, nothing fancy in that, and just incorporating peptide segment, and it's a relatively short peptide segment. And then you would need one of our reagents for this. We have not scaled this up, but I don't foresee any problems with that, but we haven't done that.
Yeah, completely agree. So you're working entirely with canonical amino acids.
Yes.
So you can do that both in recombinant expression and on solid phase synthesized peptides. You do not need extremely, say, expensive building blocks, which for a scale up, when you have to feed them into a fermentation, that is of course a cost factor then, yeah. And so I think one more question I found, why does his tag acylation work with substituted phenyl esters as acylating agent and not NHS esters?
Thank you for that question here. NHS esters are too reactive. So NHS esters were originally developed for peptide synthesis, and they are very efficient in acylating almost any amino group. The fantastic thing about NHS ester is that it also works in water. Less fantastic is that it's not very selective, and you have side reactions occurring from NHS esters. So the very special thing about our phenyl esters is that we've decreased the reactivity, right? And we've decreased it so that it reacts, probably forms a covalent intermediate, so it's reactive enough to form the transition the N-acyl imidazolium and then transfers it over. In our mechanism paper, we will go into this in greater detail. We've also done quantum chemical calculations because at the end of the day, you will have to look at how good an electrophile the NHS ester is versus our formysoxyphenyl esters. So it will be a rather comprehensive study from our side where we answer this question in greater depth.
Yeah, so very much looking forward to seeing that next paper then, hopefully soon. The mechanism. Yeah, so as I see no further questions, again, if you have any questions you haven't asked by now, do not hesitate to contact also afterwards. We will then forward those questions to the speaker. Knut, thanks again. It was a great pleasure to have you as our guest speaker here in the webinar. With this, I would like to close our online workshop. I would just like to advertise once more, Knut has done that several times already now, that Iris Biotech has some interesting of those paramethoxyphenyl derivatives for the HISTEC-specific protein modification in its catalog portfolio. So you can find them on our web shop in the section Products, Linkerology, and then the subcategory Other Cross-Linkers. And of course, endless other variations are accessible through custom synthesis. And as a follow-up then, we will provide you with the recordings of this workshop. So thanks again for joining us. Thanks to both our speakers and especially to Knut Jensen, and also a big thank you then to our QA manager Klaus Helm for taking care of the technical support. We hope you could all collect some helpful ideas and information, and you will make some interesting experience with this new, elegant, highly specific technology. We're looking forward to meeting you again in the next workshop in March 2023, which will be announced on time on our homepage and via social media. Enjoy some peaceful holidays, stay healthy, and hopefully see you soon again. Goodbye.
Thank you.